to the detriment of consumers. Commissioner, the European Commission is the custodian of the single market and needs to make sure that in 2025 the market gets prices back under control. This is what consumer associations are asking for, but especially it's what families are asking for.
Now, Mrs. Borzan has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate to all of our citizens at the World Day of Consumers. But this does not go for all consumers because the situation of position of consumers is not the same across the continent. For some countries, it's easier to buy online. For some, there is no delivery. Or, for example, the prices of telecom services are different across the continent. There is this divide between East and West Europe. We see consumer prices growing, particularly in lower income countries. The same goes for some everyday products. Sometimes consumers, I said, they need to know their rights better, as if it was our fault that people do not respect the rules. What if they have a right to a refund if the trader does not want to give a refund? We need an efficient control and supervision. This is the only way to change. Thank you.
Now with this, we are ending the interventions and we open the catch the eye. We have 3 interventions that we are going to accept it. The first one, it will be for Mrs. Carberry for 1 minute.
The European single market has been the foundation of our economic success, connecting 450 million consumers across 27 countries. But let's be honest, it's not yet finished. And by leaving it unfinished, we are letting down European consumers and businesses alike. The biggest gap is services, 70% of the EU economy. Yet, complex regulations and red tape make it tough for companies, especially SMEs, to expand across borders. Then there's the Capital Markets Union. We currently rely too much on banks for funding. We need to let savings and investments flow more freely across Europe. And let's not forget digital and energy markets, still fragmented. The solution for this? Simplified EU-wide rules. And the only final point, European consumers also expect safe and traceable products, particularly in agri-food goods. But when imports fail, we must meet standards and we must react swiftly to protect businesses, farmers and consumers alike. So 30 years after the single market was born, it's time to finish what we started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker on Kajzai, Lucas Zipper. Floor is yours.
Werte Menschen Europas, Herr Kommissar.
People of Europe, Commissioner, I'll give you a moment. I'm a lawyer. I studied law. And one of the first places where I really looked at the European Union in close detail was precisely the area of consumer protection law. In our German education system, if you're studying law, consumer protection is a very hot topic, and we all have to deal with it. And that's why it has some importance for us. It is one of the very premises of this European Union, the idea that within our single market, within this area of free trade, people who are, very vulnerable on our markets, well, thanks to the Union, they are afforded protection in order to be given a fair position on that market. And that is why I would like to use this opportunity of European Consumers' Day in order to share this point with you. Please bear in mind that the EU's consumer protection law is one of those areas where our citizens really feel directly impacted, the most impacted. Thank you.
Speaker Julien Sanchez, please.
Monsieur le Président, la Commission ose...
President, well, the Commission dares to hold a debate on consumer protection today, but a few truths need to be recalled. Firstly, without your energy market, the French could have the cheapest market energy and could have the businesses which are the most competitive in Europe. Secondly, we've just had agreement on the Mercosur agreement, and Europe's going to be importing meat which doesn't meet our standards. I'd be interested in knowing more about that. I mean, what kind of legitimacy do you have to talk about consumer protection given the kind of meat you're putting on our plates? You're affecting our public health, this is damaging for our farmers, etc. Now, what about new cars and these goals for 2035? I mean, these are gifts for our competitors. We're sacrificing our consumers on the altar of ideology. So please, given all of this, stop holding these cynical discussions on consumer rights. You are those who are exploiting consumers, but the people of Europe are awaking.
Procedure, and I would like to ask to take floor for the Commission, Commissioner Jorgensen. Floor is yours.
Thank you, President. Thank you, honourable members, for an interesting debate. I'm sure you, like me, often experience when speaking to citizens in our member states that sometimes they feel that maybe what we do in Brussels and Strasbourg seem a little bit far away from their everyday lives, because they hear about directives and regulations and acquis communautaire. But what we've discussed here today, that is exactly about the everyday living of ordinary citizens in our community. The consumer protection rights that we have in the European Union, the legislation that we've made, protect citizens every day. We all consume from we get up in the morning till we go to bed at night, whether we want it or not. We are a part of an internal market where we consume products that are produced under pretty strict rules. I say pretty because we're not there yet. We've come a far way. Christel Schaldemose and others spoke about that. But we need to go even further. And as the world changes, more becomes a part of an online marketplace, then also, of course, our regulation needs to follow that development. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Kolēģi, debatas ir slēgtas par šo.
Debates are closed for this item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is debates on cases of breaches of human rights, democracy and the rule of law, Rule 150. And we'll start with the debate on democracy and human rights in Thailand, notably the lèse-majesté law and the deportation of Uyghur refugees. And I would like to invite one of the authors to speak as the first one. First, Daniel Attar, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thailand is a country I have visited, a place of rich culture and resilience. We see Thailand as a valued partner of the European Union, and today I am not here to preach, but to strengthen that partnership, one which is rooted in democracy, human rights and mutual respect. Yet real partnerships require honesty, and we must be honest about our deep concern over the prosecution of Thai parliamentarians, opposition figures and human rights defenders under the lèse-majesté law. Peaceful democratic discourse should never be a crime. Their voices should be heard, not silenced. Democracy thrives when dissent is debated, not punished. For this reason, we strongly urge the Thai authorities to grant an amnesty to those who are prosecuted or imprisoned for the peaceful exercise of their rights. We are also concerned about the deportation of Uyghur asylum seekers and the reports of mistreatment they face. By strengthening its refugee protections, Thailand has an opportunity to lead by example. Our resolution today is not about condemnation. It's about engagement. Thailand has made progress and we recognise that. But meaningful reforms, particularly to the lèse-majesté law, must continue to ensure fundamental freedoms are upheld. We urge the Thai government to take concrete steps forward towards greater democracy, political inclusivity and human rights protections. The free trade agreement negotiations is a process that can bring prosperity if anchored in shared values. A thriving, open democracy strengthens Thailand's global position and reassures its partners that economic and political progress can go hand in hand. To our Thai friends, we stand ready to work with you, not against you. This is not just about an EU resolution, it is about the future of Thai democracy and the fundamental rights of its people. Let us use this moment not as a division, but as an opportunity, one to engage, to reform and to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, also author Engin Ereglu. Floor is yours.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr
Vice President of the Parliament, Commissioner, what we're talking about today, 40 people who are deported from Thailand to China, and it's tragic that we're talking about this now because we knew about this some weeks ago, and at the last plenary session we asked for this to take place, this debate, before the people were deported. These 40 people were deported from Thailand to China. That's not the only tragic thing here. Other states, European ones, were asked to, said that they would host these people and they wouldn't send them to China. But we postponed the debate because a delegation of the European Parliament, because a delegation was to travel to Thailand, something you approved. And therefore, please, if this happens again, this must not happen again. We've got 40 people belonging to a minority, the Uyghurs, and believe me, they're having a really hard time. And they will have a hard time there as well, and they will be subject to the same treatment meted out to other Uyghurs there.
Or Eric Marquardt for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice President, Commissioner. I too would like to make it clear that we want a good partnership with Thailand. But if you want to have a good partnership, you also need to have shared values. And this resolution is an opportunity for us to express our concerns. Concerns regarding these shared values which are being eroded continuously. It's not acceptable. Opposition politicians in Thailand are being put under pressure. They're being threatened. They're being possibly suspended from politics for the rest of their lives. Freedom of opinion is being curbed. Last year, we've had 2,000 sanctions meted out against journalists, etc. That is not acceptable. And as for the Uyghurs who are being deported to China, that is not acceptable either. They are being arbitrarily detained. We expect protection for the Uyghur community, and the Parliament, the delegation of this Parliament, will be there to make sure that these issues are raised, that the rights of these communities are safeguarded. I think it's important for us to adopt this resolution. We need to stand united and we need to be determined in asking for improvements, but of course we need to do this together with the authorities in Thailand.
Also, Susanna Ceccardi, floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. 11th of September 2018, Mrs. Abbas, a retired doctor, was taken away by force, and this arrest seems to be linked to the public criticism that her sister had made just a week earlier at a US think tank event when she was criticising Uyghur repression, and her family hasn't had any news of her since then. Then on the 20th of February, at least 40 Uyghurs were sent back from Thailand to China. This has caused significant concern. In China, Uyghurs face arbitrary detention, forced labour and a restriction of their fundamental freedoms. In addition, China is extending its influence outside its own borders. It's putting pressure on other states for them to collaborate on the repatriation of Chinese dissidents and Uyghurs. The EU needs to go further than just simple criticism. We need clear measures, more transparency in production networks, and also we need to know about forced labour. This damages our businesses because it's applied by faceless bureaucrats, and then we don't know who's doing what.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues, Commissioner. Just in the recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has built an Orwellian state that has introduced mass surveillance, forced labour and placed over 1 million Uyghurs in a concentration camp. This is the reason why many Uyghurs escape the brutal regime while placing their trust in the hands of the international community. Thailand has completely failed these victims.
Sorry.
Okay. Thailand has completely failed these victims and violated international guarantees of their dignity and rights. They were kept in inhuman conditions before being sent back to China, where they face risk of torture and imprisonment. Dear colleagues, this is yet another proof of what we have to rethink our relation with China, ensuring a value-based and consistent approach towards the Chinese Communist Party. Only such a principled foreign policy can protect human rights and our economic interests. And Thailand and our partner countries have to decide where they want to stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a KHI procedure currently, and we have two speakers. First would be Lucas Zipper. Floor is yours.
Dear people of Europe, Thailand has just deported Uyghurs back to China. And let's not sugarcoat it, and I thank you, colleague, that you did it. These people are being sent to concentration camps, not prisons, not re-education centers, concentration camps. And no, as far as we know, there are no gas chambers, but there is torture, there is forced sterilization, there is forced marriage, and a complete eradication of their culture. This is not a political extradition. This is not based on rumors. This is based on facts reported by the Spiegel, by the Fraunhofer Institute, and by other renowned institutions. Europe knows the horrors of concentration camps. We know what happens when the world stays silent in the face of such madness. We must be clear, no country in the world shall send Uyghurs back to China. And we in this House, across all political divides, we must agree on one thing. When people are thrown into concentration camps, we stand up. Because if we don't, who will? Thank you.
And next speaker, Andrei Dostal. Floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, I had an opportunity to be as a part of European Parliament mission to Thailand, and we tried to build friendly relations, which we need because we are in danger of trade wars, and Thailand is and can be a valuable partner to the European Union. Firstly, I see it as wrong to strongly condemn somebody who should be our partner, and strongly condemned is the wording of the declaration, in case we are not a court of law and we cannot assess what actually happens there. The position of Thailand is that the Uyghurs are safe, there are safeguards in China put in place. The opinions of our colleagues are different, but we should leave it to the court to resolve these things. Another issue is the critique of internal laws like the Crimen Lese Majestatis. Thailand has a kingdom for 800 years, and it is not very respectful from us to intervene into their domestic affairs. Please reconsider.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We are closing KHI procedure, and I would like to ask again to take floor for the Commission, Commissioner Jorgensen.
President, honourable members of the European Parliament, Thailand is among the EU's most long-standing partners in Asia. In 2022, we signed the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, and in 2023, free trade agreement negotiations resumed. The EU and Thailand have started a successful cooperation on security issues, including maritime security, the law of the sea, and the fight against organised crime. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement with Thailand marks an important step towards strengthening bilateral relations based on shared universal values such as democracy and human rights. Thailand is also an important partner in the region within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and multilaterally within the United Nations, where Thailand recently supported the EU-sponsored resolution on a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. In 2023, Thailand successfully held parliamentarian elections. which resulted in a peaceful transfer of power to a new civilian government for the first time after the 2014 coup. It is important that the political space in Thailand remains open and that restored political pluralism and fundamental freedoms are protected. Regarding the human rights situation, while there has been some progress, challenges remain in some areas. Charges, sedition and computer crime charges are used to limit free speech. Failure to comply with the Royal Defamation Legal Framework was at the origin of the motion for the dissolution of the main opposition party. We hope that Thailand will refrain from imposing disproportionate sentences in the lese-majeste cases, especially on children and young people. On the 27th of February 2025, Thailand proceeded with the deportation of 40 Uyghur refugees to China. The EU deeply regrets the decision by the Thai government taken in violation of the principles of non-refoulement as well as of Thailand's obligation under national and international law. It is detrimental to Thailand's international image. We have expressed our serious concerns directly to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bangkok. We also noted positive developments on the human rights situation in Thailand, like the recently adopted Marriage Equality Act, which enshrines into law the equal recognition of relationships for same-sex couples. The EU welcomes this step. Thailand became the first Southeast Asian country recognizing same-sex unions. Thailand was also elected a member of the Human Rights Council for 25 and 26 and continues its efforts to ratify the core human rights instruments. In 24, Thailand ratified the International Convention for the Protection of Persons from Enforced Disappearances and started enforcing the Prevention and Suppression of Torture and Enforced Disappearances Act. The EU supports the universal principles of democracy and human rights everywhere in the world. This is one of the fundamental tenets of the European Common Foreign Policy. Therefore, we continue to raise human rights issues in the political dialogue with Thai authorities and in multilateral fora, including at the Human Rights Council. The EU will also continue to support civil society stakeholders to promote dialogue and their effective participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Dear colleague, this debate is now closed, and I have received 6 motions for resolutions, and the vote will be held tomorrow. The next debate on the agenda is the following: severe political, humanitarian and human rights crisis in Sudan, in particular the sexual violence and child rape. And as first, I will give floor to one of the resolution authors, and that is Lucas Mundell. 2 minutes. Here you go.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Humanitarian organizations call Sudan and the situation there literally one of the worst humanitarian nightmares of recent history. So, rightly, late at night now in the European Parliament, we use the time to reflect on this worst humanitarian nightmare of recent history. We all know Ukraine and the Russian attack against Ukraine is close geographically, is also close to our way of life, but there are also other crises on earth, and in terms of quantity, Sudan is one of the major crises, and also in terms of cruelty. Even sexual violence is used as a weapon of war in this crisis. Even many among the most evil powers on our planet are present in Sudan, among others Islamistic terror, Islamistic ideology and violence, as well as Putin Russia's forces who try to exploit the soil and to torture the population there as well. I thank Hilde Wautmans and the other co-negotiators on this file. and I'm happy that we explicitly mention in this file World Food Programme, which has rightly received the Peace Nobel Prize a few years ago. 3 World Food Programme workers were killed some time ago in Sudan, and what we can see is that the funding of World Food Programme today is the same as 10 years ago, while the number of starving people is 4 times as much as that time. Maybe, and that's my proposal today, it can be, even in these times, a cooperation project between EU and US to more fund the World Food Programme, because fighting starvation must be something that's common ground for EU and US.
Thank you very much. Another author of the resolution, Marta Temido.
Sr. Presidente.
President, Commissioner, Sudan has been experiencing an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe since around 2 years ago. The Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces started a civil war. Millions of Sudanese people are caught up in this conflict, in particular women and children. Sexual violence, the rape of women, girls and boys, including gang rape, are systematically used as weapons of war. Their bodies become part of the battlefield. The United Nations considers rape the oldest, most silencing and least condemned crime of war. And it's used to sow the seeds of terror. And that's why we have to demand an investigation and accountability for those who commit these crimes. And we have to provide support to victims through humanitarian aid mechanisms and funds, particularly in health. We might not be able to end this war, but we can alleviate the suffering of the victims. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give floor to another author of the resolution, and that's Catarina Vieira.
As the brutal war rages in Sudan, the population is confronted with an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Over 150,000 have been killed. 13 million were forced to flee their homes. 30 million people are dependent on humanitarian aid. Rape has become a method of warfare, leaving permanent scars and destroying lives. The sad conclusion is that the Western world is failing humanity in Sudan. USAID cuts deeply hit the most vulnerable people, directly putting their lives at risk. And while the EU is preoccupied with the latest nonsense coming from the White House, the United Arab Emirates deliver weapons to a party that is standing accused of genocide. The EU must take its responsibility, install a monitoring mission, support the work of the ICC, and adopt sanctions to those responsible for the violations. If we believe that human rights are universal, we need to act now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give floor to another author of the resolution, that's Rima Hassan.
We will not switch, not yet. It's the time, so be careful.
In 2019, the women of Sudan took to the streets to carry out a revolution. Today, they are committing suicide because they fear getting raped. Since April 2023, the war, which opposes the Sudanese armed forces against the rapid support forces, we have seen tens of thousands of dead, more than 3 million refugees, 9 million internally displaced, and a famine, which is going to get worse because of Trump's decision to freeze US aid funds. This is the same Donald Trump who's also targeting the ICC, despite his very important investigations into crimes committed in Sudan. The European Union has externalized its borders and is funding authorities in Egypt and Tunisia, and they are actually responsible for serious human rights violations. The Sudanese are fleeing war, they find torture. In addition to that, we know, thanks to Amnesty International, that French weapon systems are being used by the rapid support forces. It is high time for the European Union to actually support the vibrant civil society of Sudan, materially and financially. I will end with their slogan, Huria Salam Wadila.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. And now I give floor to another author of the resolution, and it's Barry Andrews.
Commissioner Jorgensen and colleagues, We're having this debate about the tragedy in Sudan at a time where we're dismantling the tools that we would otherwise use to address this issue. We're having it at a time when USAID has been decapitated by the US government, when the UK has reduced its overseas aid from 0.7 a few years ago of GNI down to 0.5 and now to 0.3, but the reality is it's about 0.15 when you take account of funding that is applied for domestic migration management. The same is happening in the Netherlands, where they've halved their overseas aid, and they don't want to talk about gender equality anymore in the Netherlands. In Belgium, they've reduced it by a quarter. In Sweden, in Switzerland, and now the German government will probably do the same thing. So we can say a lot of fine words in this chamber, in this hemicycle, as we've done before. But what we've done is to surrender soft power at an industrial scale, to surrender influence. And power hates a vacuum. So we have made this decision to retreat from an order of global solidarity and replace it with nothing. And now we're surprised that you find fragile states like Sudan that is on the brink of starvation, that is so desperately impacted that the US government in January declared a genocide. I often think, pity the soul that has forgotten how to shudder. You might call it compassion fatigue, but somehow or another, this is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. We have no policy that has addressed this. There has been no statement from the Commission about this collapse in overseas aid. So it's all very well to say fine words here, but until we get a clear statement and establish a floor on European policy on these issues, those fine words will just disappear in dust. Thank you.
Paldies. Socialistu un demokrātu grupas vārdā runās Marita.
Now, on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter. Meneer de commissaris.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The rich history of Sudan and its fertile land is a contrast to the situation of the people themselves. They produce minerals for our phones, our devices. Countries in the Middle East, but also in the European Union, take commodities from Sudan, and Sudan is the victim of that. That we've seen 10,000 dead. Women and children are sexually abused, and rape is used as a weapon of war. This is the fourth time that we've been talking about Sudan here. Now we have the resolution. President, the Commission and the Member States have to provide more support now that USAID is no longer there. We have to take control of where we get our own commodities from and put sanctions on the people who are responsible for this disgraceful human rights violations. Thank you. Thank you. Madame Riedel for 1 minute.
C'est l'histoire d'une mère.
A mother who blocks the way of the militia to her two daughters. If someone's going to be raped here, it's going to be me. 8 boys who went to collect fruit, ambushed, threatened, raped, one of them 6 years old. 130 women who last October preferred to commit suicide rather than live in a broken country where they'd be raped. It's a tragedy of Sudan. Thousands of deaths, thousands of injured, forced marriage, kidnapping, slavery. It's a litany of violence day by day, which talks about the physical and moral destruction of an entire population. In this parliament, some parliamentarians are refusing to talk about their sexual and reproductive rights, the right to abortion, right to reproductive rights, because women who become pregnant after being raped either often commit suicide or are rejected by their own families. Foreign countries are supplying weapons, and we
call on the European Commission to respect the embargo, which has been in place since 2004 and which is not still being accepted.
Thank you. Next speaker, Leyre Pahin, for 1 minute.
Señorías, ladies and gentlemen, the humanitarian situation in Sudan is a mirror which reflects all of the failures of the international community, the impact of climate change, extreme poverty, more than half of the population, sexual violence and systematic sexual violence against children as a weapon of war. Hospitals have disappeared, there's no infrastructure left. And now one could ask what more needs to happen until we take the situation seriously, because this is being forgotten. And what's more, this Monday, the US government decided to withdraw its official development assistance, and this means that the European Union must redouble its efforts. We need to be more present there. We've spoken about security today, and security is not just about defence, it's also about conflict resolution and fighting poverty. Thank you.
Hannes Heide, for 1 minute, please.
Danke, Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. What we're seeing in Sudan is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. And we revisit that regularly in plenary, but there's still no solution in view. This week, we celebrated International Women's Day here in Parliament, and at the same time, women and children are being systematically raped, kidnapped, and enslaved in Sudan. UNICEF accounted for 220 cases of violence against rape against children. Women are kept in camps and raped. And how does the world react? The US withdraws, a fatal signal. More humanitarian help is necessary. Victims need protection, medical care, and only targeted measures will change this unacceptable situation. A weapons embargo, international criminal convictions, and also embargoes against those who finance this war, the paramilitary groups, SAF, and the financiers from outside who provide weapons.
Speaker Nikos Papandreou, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. It's 4 months, and we've spoken about Sudan 3 times. We haven't changed much. The previous speaker said something I agree with, setting up an EU AID. But that'll take time. It won't happen tomorrow. We need, of course, to come in with humanitarian support. Tomorrow's vote, though, does have some concrete proposals to send peacekeeping forces right away to protect civilians, create safe spaces for women and children, sanction the commanders, and impose an arms embargo on Sudan as we have done on Darfur. I would like to remind the Chamber that one of our NATO allies is supplying drones to both sides of the conflict, an incredible profit-making machine from the death of the Sudanese. So let's impose our vote tomorrow. Let's ask the international community to send in peacekeeping forces, because this will be a ruined generation born from violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we are starting HI procedure, and I have 3 speakers on my list. First would be Muriel Lorraine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Tonight's debate shows sexual violence, and particularly rape as a weapon of war, has to stop. The collective indifference around these actions is unacceptable. Since the beginning of the war in 2023, over 1 million people have fled to Chad. This is one of the poorest countries in the world. At the end of February, I went to the east of Chad, where there are a large number of Sudanese refugees living in very difficult situations despite the best efforts of NGOs. Humanitarian requirements are huge, and yet financing is being removed. For example, from the Americans, all funding is threatened or is insufficient. We have to be up to the challenge. The European Union has to be able to come and help these people who really do need it.
Next speaker, Sandra Gomez-Lopez.
Thank you, Chair.
Sudan is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, and I would like to talk about the worst aspect of this. Currently, sexual violence suffered by boys and girls is becoming even more extreme. This is one of the most invisible conflicts that we can see. Babies under the age of 1 are being raped. And I want to talk to you today, not as a politician, but as a mother. Imagine what it's like to be a mother who can't protect her child or her baby, a baby that suffered one of the most atrocious things anyone could ever suffer. And it's not even a key part of our political debate, this issue. So I'd like to call on everybody to pursue justice. If we're not able to protect a child from a rapist, what exactly are we doing here in this Parliament? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Lucas Zipper.
Dear people of Europe, let me be clear, I support the authors in their motion, but I'm also wondering, Mr. Andrews, you talked about soft power and about humanitarian aid, but are we talking about economic collapse? Are we talking about a pandemic, about political instability, or a natural disaster? Ms. Pagin said we have to take this situation serious. I am asking, what is a serious reaction to war? Mr. Heide said we need to protect the victims. How do you protect people from armed killers and rapists? Look up again on this board. It says child rape. Child rape. And that is something, in my opinion, where we need to send something named after this union of ours, Eurofighters. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We are closing KHI procedure, and I would like again to ask Commissioner Jorgensen to take floor for the Commission.
Thank you, President. Honourable members, as we are fast approaching the second anniversary of the war in Sudan, neither belligerent party wants to end it. The responsibilities for this human-made calamity rests with the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, as well as their respective affiliated militias. Because of this war, the people of Sudan are facing a catastrophic humanitarian situation. Sudan is the country with the most people in need, over 30 million. To put this in perspective, Sudan accounts for 10% of all people requiring humanitarian aid across the world. Yet, Sudan represents less than 1% of the world's population. The Sudanese people are facing an unprecedented worsening of the nutrition and food crisis, which is leading to a severe famine as evidenced in Darfur and Kordofan. Unfortunately, many more regions are likely experiencing famine-like conditions. Again, as a comparison, it is only the third time in the 21st century that famine is declared worldwide. Sudan is also the epicenter of the largest protection crisis in the world. Appalling reports of atrocious international humanitarian law and human rights violations have been witnessed throughout the country, in particular the most conflict-affected areas. To further aggravate things, rape and gender-based violence committed by both belligerent parties are also used as tactics on the battlefield. 6.7 million people are at risk of gender-based violence. Displaced refugees, migrant women and girls, or even little boys are particularly vulnerable. Sex crimes and violence in conflict is a war crime. In Sudan, we have to continue to push for peace. Together with our regional and international partners, including the African Union and the United Nations, we call for an immediate ceasefire and a sustainable political solution to the conflict. The EU continues to engage with both warring parties, mainly through the work of the EU Special Representatives for the Horn of Africa. There must be accountability for crimes committed too. This is also a part and parcel of rebuilding Sudan once the war is over. Finally, the EU will keep funding initiatives across the globe that provide survivors with healthcare, legal assistance and psychosocial support. And we call on others to do so as well. For the victims, wherever you are, the EU's message is clear. You are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Kolēģi, šīs debates tagad ir slēgtas. Esmu saņēmis 7 rezolūciju priekšlikumus.
I have received 7 draft resolutions. The vote will take place tomorrow. Now we have the next item, which unlawful detention and sham trials of Armenian hostages, including high-ranking political representatives from Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan. I'm about to give the floor to the author of the document, Ms. Lexman. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, colleagues, Commissioner. Over 20 political hostages, which were imprisoned during the ethnic cleansing of Christian Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh, are still detained in Azerbaijan. They are facing inhuman conditions and sham trials, which could result in their life imprisonment. This is the real face of Aliyev's regime which oppresses its own citizens and disregards international obligations. While the European Union comes with a strategic partnership, the regime in Baku continues to threaten its neighbours and thwart efforts toward regional peace. In the current geopolitical environment, there is a strong need for the EU to defend its values, especially in its closest neighbourhood. Instead, we are again appeasing the oppressor and rewarding Aliyev's actions with enhanced trade. Have we not learned the lesson? It's time to stop dreaming about a strategic partnership, face reality and act in accordance to our values and principles. We have to take an urgent action and address claims and these clear violations of basic human rights and assure that the hostages are immediately and unconditionally released. Leading judges and prosecutors who play a role in these unjust trials should face sanctions. And we have to make sure that any future cooperation with Azerbaijan is based on conditions of the release of all the political prisoners and demonstrated readiness of Baku to engage in a peace agreement which would respect the rights of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. Thank you.
Paldies. Vārds autoram Vasilijam.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Mr. Dinky for 2 minutes.
Domnule președinte.
President, colleagues, the situation of political prisoners in Nagorno-Karabakh raises a big question mark about the justice, stability and the peace in this part of the Caucasus. Now, of course, like James Forsyth said, this region is one of the most colorful and vivid in the world. And there are so many diverging interests that any diplomatic action is very complicated. Yet, when it comes to the peace and stability in the Caucasus, the European Parliament never strayed from its principles. It always called for the sovereignty and the independence of Armenia. We've had several resolutions in March and in October last year. However, we still see that there is a very aggressive rhetoric from the Azerbaijan state against the political detainees in Nagorno-Karabakh. We want to be part of the trials, and we want to support sanctions against the Azerbaijani officials who commit such judicial abuse. We need to strictly sanction these officials and to discourage further future abuse. The prospects are far from being positive. And given the military landscape in the area, I think we should act now and adopt concrete measures to prevent a future tragedy. And this is something that the Commission should look into. As I said, this region of the Southern Caucasus is very complicated, which is why we need to be diplomatic, smart, but also firm to protect our values and human rights. These prisoners are not just a number. They are somebody's brothers, children, or parents. They deserve to be free, and their release should be part of a wider effort to build a future based on mutual trust and cooperation, but first of all, respect for the global order and for rules. We need to fight for this and keep this vision alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Mr. Gyadi for 1 minute.
It's been more than 1 year since Azerbaijan's attack on Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenians are still kept away from their homeland. And they haven't managed to heal the wounds from the loss of their the traditions and their territory. They're still being subjected to humiliation and repression. Unfortunately, Aliyev's regime does not only not respect international law and human rights, but it continues to illegally occupy Armenian territory. The EU needs to safeguard democratic values as they stem from ancient Greece. It needs to stand firm against Azerbaijan and Turkey that are international criminals. We need to put a stop to national cleansing that they have taken, that has happened against the Armenian and the Greek and Cypriot peoples.
The next speaker is Ms. Glazova, 1 minute.
Nous sommes réunis aujourd'hui pour...
We're here today to demand the release of the 23 Armenian hostages held by Baku, who are undergoing a deeply unfair trial. I'm the author of this initiative, and I'd like to thank my co-authors. The trial underway bears close comparison with the Stalinist trials, and the hostages are being deprived of fair treatment, and their only crime being Armenian. But I'd like to speak to Kaya Kallas, regretting that once again she's not here to listen to us. Madam High Representative, I'd like to thank you for sending material to Armenia via the European Peace Facility, and I'd also like to welcome the extension of the mandate of the European Union mission in Armenia. It's doing an excellent job, and I would encourage you to see the work it's doing on the ground yourself. Madam High Representative, I was recently in Armenia, and I hope that you will go there soon. You'll see a country that wants peace, that dreams of Europe, that is faced with a neighbour, Azerbaijan, which continues to threaten it and is one of Russia's greatest allies. I hope you'll resist the call of those who call for an equidistant approach to Yerevan and Baku. And I hope that you will bear in mind that Azerbaijan is carrying out a policy of hostile interference towards France. And that can't remain unresponded to.
Next speaker, author Marina Mejour.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. 2 years ago, we saw a crime against humanity take place against deafening silence. In Nagorno-Karabakh, tried to discuss with the Aliyev regime. These people's identity goes back millennia, and faced with a tragedy, Europe was not able to act with Baku. Today, we must act to demand the liberation of detainees held by Azerbaijan. They're being held and tortured, and their only crime is having defended their people and their land and their rights. We if we do nothing, it means we're sending out a clear message to Aliyev that he can continue what he's doing against Armenia with impunity. So silence is no longer an option. We have to send out a clear signal. Armenia, it does not stand alone. We stand united by their sides to ensure respect for their sovereignty, territorial integrity, and their right to live in peace and security without fear from new aggression from their Azerbaijani neighbours.
The next speaker is Mr. Mathieu Vallée, for 1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Once again, we are deploring, condemning the hostile activities of Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, we have had several requests, but there was ethnic cleansing there, but there's been silence around this. What about the hostile approach from Azerbaijan towards France, which is a member state of the European Union? There's a spreading of disinformation in New Caledonia. And what about our police, our firemen in New Caledonia? And they wanted to defend this European territory. Therefore, it's important to defend the strategic autonomy of this territory in the Indo-Pacific. This is key for fisheries, science, energy in the European Union across the world. Thank you.
Paldies. Vārds Katarina.
Thank you very much. The next speaker goes to Ms. Vieira for 1 minute.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, Azerbaijan is facing a deep human rights crisis. The government installed severe restrictions on freedom of expression, assembly and association, and weaponized the legal system against critical voices. Armenian detainees are one of the groups most severely affected by the government's policies. Ill treatment is widespread and fair trials have become an illusion. I am glad that this Parliament is consistently and strongly addressing the situation, but sadly, we seem to be the only EU institution doing so. We cannot allow continuing business as usual with Azerbaijan, sacrificing our values because of economic and energy interests. This is not only hypocritical, but it generates dependencies, making us vulnerable for blackmail. Have we not learned any lesson from our dependencies with Russia in the past? It is time we prioritize human rights above cheap oil and gas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker also Tomáš Frolich.
Die Armenier sind ein stolzes Volk, das ein
Armenia is a proud people. It's been attacked by Azerbaijan. It's been abandoned by the European Union, but also by Russia. And there's been attacks on Nagorno-Karabakh, hundreds of deaths, hundreds of thousands. Armenians have had to flee, and many are being held hostage today. We've had a systematic destruction of the cultural heritage of the first Christian country in the world. Why do we hear so little about this? Well, it's because European politicians play a shameful role. Politicians from the CDU have been accused of corruption and looking away when Christians in Armenian Christians are being expelled. And there's also 30 million euros that have been involved in this, and we should be hearing more about this. But stability in the Southern Caucasus is in our interest. We need peace talks, and we need proper treatment of Armenian hostages, Armenian people, and also the Armenian cultural heritage. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now for the EPP, it's Ms. Sherba for 1 minute.
Commissioner, President, this is a very timely debate. Everything in the content of the draft resolution has been said already. However, I still have a few reflections. The Armenian authorities, since they lost the hold on Nagorno-Karabakh, decided to change the course of their external policy. If we are thinking about further integration of Armenia with the West, we should enhance our economic ties with them. We should be more active and more visible in Armenia. We should also prolong the activity of the civic mission in that country for another 2 years. That means we will be seen as a mediator between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we should be all oriented towards long-standing permanent peace over there. What we are getting as information about torture and detentions cannot pass unnoticed. We have to fight for European values, for human dignity and for rule of law. Thank you.
So, Socialist and Democratic Group, Vytenis Povilos Andriukaitis.
Pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos, po Azerbaijan.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, after the military actions by Azerbaijan in Karabakh, we can say that there is no more Armenia there. Azerbaijan has carried out ethnic cleansing. This is a war crime. Azerbaijan has international obligations, the International Human Rights Declaration and the international legal obligations. So the country should be sanctioned. There are Armenian people who have been imprisoned. Their conditions of detention are terrible. Some have declared a hunger strike, and so their health is under threat. We have to make all possible efforts to try to find a solution. Political prisoners should be released as soon as possible. Azerbaijan does not want an end to this conflict and does not want to respond to the international community's demands.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are discussing another important resolution about the unlawful detention and sham trials of Armenian hostages, including senior political representatives from Nagorno-Karabakh. The annexation of this region by Azerbaijan has triggered a humanitarian crisis and a mass exodus of Armenian civilians. The situation calls for concrete actions such as establishing a human rights monitoring mission, organizing talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and making future EU cooperation with Azerbaijan conditional on progress in human rights. For years, the EU has been interfering in Poland's democratic order. Now it is planning to organize a round table on the democratic presidential elections in Poland to prevent a non-partisan candidate from winning. But it is not reacting where human rights are really being violated. Europe, this is not the time for loud speeches and applause. I demand firm action to resolve a real problem, which is undoubtedly the situation in the Caucasus.
Thank you. For the Renew Europe Group, Michael McNamara.
Colleagues, the deterioration in respect for human rights in Azerbaijan should be a source of concern to this Parliament, but so too should the Commission's silence in the face of that. The ongoing detention and trial of 16 persons from Nagorno-Karabakh, including 8 former leaders, must be condemned for what it is, a Stalinist show trial. So too must the denial of access to the media and observers, even though the trials are supposedly being held in public. This is exacerbated by Azerbaijan's ongoing refusal to cooperate with the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhumane or Degrading Treatment, and this too should be noted by this Parliament and the European Commission. The Red Cross, the only external organisation with access to these prisoners, has now been asked to withdraw from Azerbaijan, and this too needs to be noted. But it does seem that the Commission is only capable of condemning one country at a time, and that should not be the case when there is such a clear deterioration in standards as there is in Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker for the left group, Fernando Barena Arsa, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Azerbaijan holds the painful record of having made a country disappear overnight without the international community paying too much attention to the fact. It's almost 2 years that Azerbaijan completed an ethnic cleansing of the entire Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. It emptied the country of Armenians and replaced them with Azeri individuals. And furthermore, we cannot forget that Azerbaijan is an authoritarian state where any legitimate political dissent is cracked down. We must demand the release of the 23 Armenian prisoners of war who are being subjected to sham trials, violations of due process and trumped-up charges. In this regard, it's particularly important for the International Criminal Court to investigate the cases submitted by the Ombudsman of Nagorno-Karabakh and provide a judicial response to the cases of forced expulsion and ethnic cleansing committed by Azerbaijan against the Armenian population of Artsakh. As this violent approach by Azerbaijan has the whole Armenian community in its sights, I have a direct question to High Commissioner Kallas. Are you ready to impose the same sanctions against Aliyev if he invades Armenia as the European Union has imposed against Putin after the invasion of Ukraine? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Massimiliano Salini, floor is yours.
Grazie.
Thank you. Azerbaijan continues undisturbed with its violence towards the Armenian people. After the military invasion from September 2023 in Nagorno-Karabakh and the deportation of 100,000 citizens, we now see these illegal detentions of 23 Armenian citizens and now these completely opaque trials. The Armenians are not pardoned for what they've done. The first thing they've done, apparently, is geographical, interrupting the continuity between Azerbaijan and Turkey. And then secondly, religious. They're Christian. The requests put from the Armenian people to the European Union should be heeded. It's up to us as Europeans to decide whether or not we want to treat the Azeris in the same way as we treat the Russians because of how they treat Ukraine. Proper sanctions and demand freedom for these 23 people who are being illegally detained.
François Xavier Bellamy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire. Alors voilà.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. We've reached a summit of indecency. Aliyev attacks Nagorno-Karabakh, attacking a population that just wished to live in peace on its own land that it's been living on for thousands of years now. Aliyev is deporting civilian populations using bombs and armaments and jihadist mercenaries. And after having done that, he's blaming the victims. 23 Armenian prisoners are undergoing a show trial, which recalls the peak of Stalin. And what is Europe doing? Remaining silent. Commissioner, you're responsible for energy. How can you justify the import of gas from Azerbaijan with a specific contract, with the specific provisions contained therein? How can we justify criminals doing heinous acts in Europe and while the gas still flows? Isn't it as bad getting gas from Baku as it is from Moscow? Isn't it the same gas? We await an answer on this, Commissioner.
So we don't have any speaker on KHI procedures. That's why I will ask Commissioner Jorgensen to take floor.
President, honourable members, like this House, the Commission are following the trials against the 16 Karabakh Armenian defendants that are taking place at the Baku military court since January 17th of this year. We are aware that human rights organizations have expressed concerns over the fairness of the trials and treatments of the accused. Many of you have expressed similar concerns here today. We take these concerns very seriously and are closely following the developments. The right to a fair trial must be ensured and respected. The EU Special Representative for the South Caucasus is also closely following related issues and relaying our concerns to the authorities in Baku. Our relationship with Azerbaijan is founded on principles both sides have committed themselves to. First and foremost, the respect for human rights and the rule of law. The European Union will therefore continue to call on the government of Azerbaijan to abide by its international obligations, which include the rights to due process and fair trial. We will use every opportunity to urge Azerbaijan to ensure dignified and safe conditions for detainees. The reports of torture and ill treatment should be promptly and impartially investigated. The trials of Baku Military Court touch on the much larger question of achieving lasting and sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, of building a peaceful, stable and prosperous South Caucasus. We therefore continue to call on both Armenia and Azerbaijan to build on their achievements and to continue making progress on their path towards full normalization of relations. It is important that the governments of both countries take their societies along on the path. The EU will continue to support this process with all the tools at our disposal. We stand ready to help the parties in their dialogue aimed at achieving lasting and sustainable peace. Honourable members, I am grateful for this House's persistence in drawing attention to the situation in Azerbaijan and the wider region. It is an expression of our shared commitment to human rights and the rule of law as a guiding principle in our engagement with Azerbaijan and other partners around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, we are closing debate on this point in agenda. I received 8 proposals for resolution and vote will take place tomorrow. Before we will go to the next point in agenda, I would like to welcome delegation from the Parliamentary Assembly of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is participating in a 6th EU Bosnia and Herzegovina Stabilization and Association Parliamentary Committee meeting. Welcome. This late night, but welcome. Kolēģi, mums nākamais darba kārtības punkts ir komisijas paziņojums.
Thank you. Now we have Commission statement, secessionist threats in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the recent escalation in tensions. I'd now like to give the floor to the Commission. And to Commissioner Hansen, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members. 1 year has passed since the historic decision of the European Council to open EU accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. It seems the reform enthusiasm has evaporated and Bosnia and Herzegovina has again entered into an institutional and political crisis. To get back on track, we call on all political actors to continue taking resolute action to finalise reforms in line with the EU acquis and European standards. In this regard, it is crucial to continue addressing the relevant steps to move forward on the EU path. It is what the vast majority of citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina expects. The Commission continuously supports the country in this endeavour. Despite turbulence in the ruling majority, the adoption in Parliament on 30th of January of the law on personal data protection, a precondition for cooperation with Eurojust, and the law on border control was a good signal into the right direction. We need further progress, and this means in particular the adoption of the law on courts and the law on high judicial and prosecutorial council fully in line with European standards. The appointment of a chief negotiator also remains important. Let's also remind Bosnia and Herzegovina not to lose the opportunity of over €1 billion of investments through the growth plan for the Western Balkans. Therefore, it is important for the country to submit its reform agenda without further delay. It is even more important in view of the Western Balkans Leaders Summit on the growth plan in Skopje next week on the 19th and the 20th of March. Contrary to the progress on the EU path, recent actions by the Republika Srpska leadership following the first instance ruling in the criminal trial against Milorad Dodik and on the 26th of February present a serious setback. On Thursday, 27th of February, the Republika Srpska National Assembly adopted 4 laws in urgent procedure, including to ban state-level judicial and police bodies from operating in the entity, to set up a separate judiciary council and to target NGOs as foreign agents. These legal acts undermine